Top 10 rock albums that changed music forever. These are not just records, these are detonations. Moments in time that rearranged everything that came before them and made everything that came after impossible to imagine without them. From the birth of the blues to the invention of heavy metal, from a Mississippi Delta shack to stadiums holding 100,000 people, these are the 10 albums that did not just reflect music history, they created it. Number 10. King of the Delta blues singers, Robert Johnson, recorded 1936 and 1937, released 1961, before Led Zeppelin, before Eric Clapton, before the Rolling Stones, before any of it. There was Robert Johnson standing at the crossroads with a battered guitar and a voice that sounded like it had already seen the end of the world. Robert Johnson only recorded 29 songs in his entire life. He died at 27 in mysterious circumstances. Legend says he sold his soul to the devil for that guitar playing. What is not legend is the technical reality. His ability to play bass lines, melody and rhythm simultaneously on a single guitar was so advanced that when his recordings finally reached the mainstream in 1961, musicians who heard them for the first time refused to believe one man was playing. Eric Clapton called him the most important blues musician who ever lived. Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones said Johnson was the beginning of everything. Jimmy Page built the entire foundation of Led Zeppelin's guitar language on what he learned from this record. Without Robert Johnson, there is no blues rock, no heavy metal, no hard rock. The entire family tree starts here. Number 9. Are You Experienced? The Jimi Hendrix Experience, 1967. Nobody had ever heard anything like it. Nobody. In 1967, when this album hit, guitar players heard the opening notes of Purple Haze and their understanding of what the electric guitar could do permanently shattered. Jimi Hendrix did not just play guitar. He reinvented the instrument from the ground up. Feedback, whammy bar manipulation, studio effects used as creative tools rather than production afterthoughts. A physical relationship with the guitar that turned every performance into something that had never existed before. Are You Experienced that introduced the world to what a guitar could sound like when someone with no ceiling on their imagination picked one up. Every hard rock guitarist who came after, every single one learned from this record. Pete Townshend, Jeff Beck, Carlos Santana, Eddie Van Halen, Slash, all of them. One album, 1 year. Everything changed. Number 8, Disraeli Gear's Cream, 1967. The same year Hendrix exploded, Eric Clapton, Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker released the record that invented blues rock as a genre. Cream took American blues artists like Robert Johnson, Muddy Waters and Skip James and ran that music through Marshall stacks at volumes that had never been attempted. Strange Brew, Sunshine of Your Love, White Room. These songs created the template for every blues rock band that followed for the next 50 years. Clapton's guitar tone on this record became the benchmark standard for rock guitar. The power trio format, lead guitar, bass, drums, no rhythm guitar, no safety net, became the blueprint that Black Sabbath, ZZ Top, Rush and hundreds of others would follow. If Robert Johnson planted the seed, Cream set it on fire. Number 7. Van Halen, 1978. There are before moments and after moments in guitar history. The release of Van Halen's debut album in 1978 is one of the most dramatic afters in the history of the instrument, the song Eruption. 1 minute and 42 seconds of Eddie Van Halen playing a solo guitar piece using a two-handed tapping technique that had never been heard on a major rock record. Guitar players the world over heard it and went back to the drawing board. It was not just the technique, it was the joy, the speed, the seemingly impossible combination of precision and feel. Eddie Van Halen made the most technically demanding guitar playing sound effortless and fun, which made it both inspiring and deeply humbling simultaneously. The album went platinum 11 times. It launched the era of guitar hero worship that defined the entire decade of the 1980s. No Eddie Van Halen debut, no guitar boom, no shred era, no Steve Vai, no Joe Satriani, no Guns N' Roses. Number 6. Back in Black. A CDC 1980, 50 million copies sold, one of the 3 best-selling albums in the history of recorded music, and it almost did not exist. A CDC had just lost their singer Bon Scott to alcohol poisoning, and the music world assumed the band was finished. Instead, they hired an unknown singer from Newcastle, England, named Brian Johnson, walked into a studio in the Bahamas, and recorded the most commercially successful hard rock album ever made in just 2 weeks. Back in Black proved something that the music industry keeps forgetting and keeps having to relearn. Simplicity at the highest level of execution is unbeatable. There is nothing fancy about the riff on Hell's Bells or You Shook Me All Night Long. There does not need to be. When a riff is that perfect, that locked in, that physically impossible to ignore, it transcends music and becomes something more like gravity. Back in Black did not invent hard rock, it perfected it. Number 5. Master of Puppets, Metallica, 1986. If Back in Black is the perfection of simplicity, Master of Puppets is the perfection of complexity. Metallica's 3rd studio album remains the greatest heavy metal record ever made by virtually every critical measure. The opening track Battery moves from acoustic guitar into one of the most devastating metal riffs ever constructed. The title track Master of Puppets, 8.5 minutes long, with no single released and no radio play, became one of the most beloved songs in rock history on pure word of mouth alone. The album sold 5 million copies in the United States without a single, without MTV, and without any traditional promotional machinery. Just the music passed from person to person, because the music was that powerful. Master of Puppets defined thrash metal as a genre, influenced every metal band that came after it, and demonstrated that complexity and aggression could coexist with genuine musical depth. Every serious heavy metal musician alive has a story about the first time this record hit them. Number 4. Black Sabbath, 1970. 4 working-class boys from Birmingham, England, with no formal musical training, recording a debut album in one day for £600, invented heavy metal. That is not an opinion. That is the documented origin of an entire genre that has produced hundreds of thousands of bands across 6 decades and counting. The opening title track with its thunderstorm, its church bells, and then that descending tritone riff, the so-called Devil's Interval, literally banned by the Catholic Church in the medieval period for sounding too evil, announced something the world had never heard before. Tony Iommi, who had lost the tips of 2 fingers in a factory accident and lowered his tuning to make the strings easier to bend, created a guitar sound that was heavier, darker, and more menacing than anything that had existed. Ozzy Osbourne's voice floated over the top of that darkness. Geezer Butler's bass underpinned everything, and Bill Ward's jazz-influenced drumming created space. This was not accidental. This was revolutionary. Without this record, there is no Metallica, no Slayer, no Pantera, no Iron Maiden, no modern heavy metal of any kind. Number 3. Led Zeppelin 4. Led Zeppelin, 1971. The album with no name, no title on the cover, no band name on the cover, just 4 mysterious symbols, 1 for each member. The label called it 4 Symbols. Fans called it Zoso. History simply calls it one of the greatest rock albums ever recorded. Stairway to Heaven alone would be enough to justify its place on this list. 8 minutes that move from acoustic folk to one of the most iconic guitar solos in history in a way that still sounds like nothing else. But Black Dog, Rock and Roll, When the Levee Breaks, and Going to California make the full record an almost impossibly sustained statement of hard rock mastery. Robert Plant's voice at its absolute peak, Jimmy Page wielding blues, folk, and hard rock simultaneously, John Paul Jones providing an orchestral foundation that most bands with 3 times the members could not achieve. John Bonham's drum performance on When the Levee Breaks, recorded in a stairwell to capture the natural reverb, remains the most sampled drum recording in the history of popular music. 23 million copies sold in the United States alone, changed hard rock forever. Number 2, Nevermind, Nirvana, 1991. On September the 10th, 1991, the Billboard album chart was topped by Skid Row, Boyz II Men, and Bonnie Raitt. 6 weeks later, Nevermind entered the chart. By January of 1992, it had knocked Michael Jackson off the #1 position. Hair metal was over, glam rock was over, an entire musical era ended in a matter of weeks. Kurt Cobain did not set out to destroy anything. He was just making the music that felt honest to him. Raw, loud, melodic, underneath all the distortion, emotionally direct in a way that contrasted completely with the artifice that had dominated rock radio throughout the 1980s. Smells Like Teen Spirit became the anthem of a generation that had not known it was waiting for one. Butch Vig's production made the record simultaneously massive and intimate. Dave Grohl's drumming was ferociously powerful, and Cobain's songwriting, his ability to construct a pop melody inside a noise rock framework, created something that could not be ignored no matter how hard the old guard tried to ignore it. Nevermind did not just change rock, it reset the entire mainstream music industry's understanding of what young people wanted to hear. Number 1, The Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd, 1973. 741 weeks on the Billboard albums chart, 50 million copies sold. Consistently ranked the greatest rock album ever made by critics, musicians, and fans across 6 decades of retrospective analysis. Pink Floyd's 8th studio album is the closest thing rock music has ever produced to a perfect artistic statement. Every element, the music, the lyrics, the production, the sequencing, the spoken word passages, the sound effects, functions as part of a single unified concept, exploring the forces that drive human beings toward madness. Time, money, war, mental illness, mortality. The sonic architecture Roger Waters, David Gilmour, Richard Wright, and Nick Mason constructed to carry those themes was something that had never existed in rock music before. Alan Parsons' engineering work created sounds and textures that other producers spent the next decade trying to replicate. David Gilmour's guitar solo on Money remains one of the most perfectly constructed pieces of guitar playing ever committed to tape. And the album proves something that every serious rock musician needed to understand. A rock band with enough ambition, enough craft, and enough courage to say something real could make an album that would outlast every trend, every era, and every generation of listeners. Dark Side of the Moon does not belong to 1973. It belongs to everyone who has ever put on headphones, pressed play, and felt the world outside go quiet. These 10 albums did not just make music, they made history. And every guitar player, every singer, every band that has ever stood in front of an amplifier and felt that electricity moved through them owes a debt to every one of these records. The sound of rock and roll is the sound of people pushing further than anyone thought possible, and it is nowhere close to finished.